The most dangerous lies are the ones we create before anyone has the chance to tell the truth. Claire Carter tightened her hands around the steering wheel as afternoon traffic slowed beneath the towering glass buildings of Midtown Manhattan. The traffic light ahead turned red, forcing every car to stop beneath a skyline that had witnessed countless hurried lives crossing paths without ever truly seeing one another. She glanced absent-mindedly through her windshield, expecting nothing more than another ordinary delay before heading home. Instead, her eyes settled on the entrance of a modern women's health center across the intersection. The revolving glass doors opened, and her billionaire husband, Ethan Carter, stepped outside adjusting the sleeve of his navy suit. For a brief moment Claire smiled with quiet relief. She had assumed he was meeting investors downtown, just as he had mentioned during breakfast. Then everything changed. A young blonde woman, visibly pregnant and wearing a light blue maternity dress beneath a beige cardigan, walked out behind him with a warm smile that carried unmistakable familiarity. She lifted one hand and waved happily toward Ethan. Without hesitation, Ethan smiled back and returned the wave before speaking to her with the relaxed expression Claire had not seen directed toward her in weeks. Time seemed to stop even though the city around her continued moving. Taxi horns echoed faintly in the distance. A cyclist crossed the intersection. Pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Yet inside Claire's car, there was only silence. She noticed the pale hospital identification bracelet still wrapped around the young woman's wrist as sunlight reflected across the plastic band. Ethan pointed toward the entrance as though reminding her about something before she nodded gratefully. Their conversation lasted only seconds, but from where Claire sat, every gesture appeared painfully personal. She instinctively reached for her phone, her thumb hovering above Ethan's name. One simple question could end every frightening thought racing through her mind. Instead, she slowly lowered the phone back into the center console. The traffic light turned green. Drivers behind her tapped their horns, urging the line of cars forward. Claire pressed gently on the accelerator, but in her rearview mirror she caught one final glimpse of Ethan holding the building's door open while the pregnant woman walked carefully inside. The image remained fixed in her mind long after the building disappeared behind another row of Manhattan traffic. During the drive home, memories quietly surfaced one after another. Ethan had been leaving the house unusually early every Friday for nearly 4 months. Important meetings, he always explained with an apologetic smile. Sometimes he returned later than expected carrying the tired expression of someone who had spent an exhausting day solving complicated problems. Claire had believed him because throughout 12 years together Ethan had earned her trust through countless acts of kindness, honesty, and unwavering support. Yet trust, she realized, could be shaken by a single unexplained moment. She pulled into the driveway of their elegant townhouse just as the late afternoon sun stretched across the quiet street. Inside, everything looked exactly as it had that morning. Fresh flowers rested on the kitchen island. 2 coffee mugs remained beside the sink. Ethan's favorite jacket still hung neatly by the front door. Claire stood in the silent kitchen, closed her eyes, and replayed the scene at the red light once again. She did not cry. She did not become angry. She simply whispered one quiet sentence into the empty room. "Please let there be an explanation I cannot see yet." That evening the Carter townhouse felt unusually quiet despite every familiar comfort surrounding it. Warm lights glowed across the spacious kitchen, soft jazz played from hidden ceiling speakers, and the aroma of freshly baked rosemary bread filled the air exactly as it did almost every Thursday. Claire moved through the house with practiced ease, setting 2 dinner plates on the dining table while silently replaying the afternoon over and over again. Every detail remained painfully vivid. The elegant glass entrance. Ethan's relaxed smile. The pregnant woman's wave. The pale hospital bracelet resting against her wrist. Claire had always believed memory softened difficult moments with time. Instead, this one seemed to sharpen each time she remembered it. At precisely 6:30, the front door opened. Ethan stepped inside carrying his leather briefcase, loosening his tie with the familiar tired smile that had greeted her after countless demanding workdays. "Something smells incredible," he said warmly as he placed his keys into the ceramic bowl near the entrance. "I hope you did not wait too long for me." Claire smiled gently. "Dinner is ready." Her voice sounded perfectly normal, almost surprising even herself. Ethan walked into the kitchen and kissed her forehead with the effortless affection that had defined their marriage for more than a decade. Nothing about his behavior suggested guilt or nervousness. He looked exactly like the husband she had trusted through promotions, business crises, family holidays, and quiet Sunday mornings. During dinner they spoke about ordinary things. Ethan mentioned an upcoming board meeting. Claire described a charity committee planning session scheduled for next week. They discussed a neighbor renovating an old brownstone and laughed about their golden retriever refusing to leave the backyard during the morning rain. Anyone watching would have seen a peaceful marriage built upon years of comfort and companionship. Yet beneath every ordinary conversation, one unanswered question quietly remained. More than once Claire almost asked where Ethan had spent the afternoon. Each time she stopped herself. She wanted the truth, but she wanted it without anger, accusation, or assumptions. Later that evening Ethan received a brief message on his phone. He glanced at the screen, smiled faintly with visible relief, and typed a short reply before placing the phone face down on the coffee table. The simple gesture lasted only seconds, but Claire noticed it immediately. She did not ask who had sent the message. Instead, she noticed something else. Ethan looked less worried than he had in weeks. Whatever conversation had taken place earlier that day seemed to have lifted a burden from his shoulders. As the evening continued, Ethan excused himself to review documents in his home office before an early executive meeting the following morning. Claire remained alone in the living room, watching rain begin to fall beyond the tall windows overlooking the quiet Manhattan street. She reached for a framed photograph resting beside the fireplace. It showed the two of them smiling on the coast of Maine during their 10th wedding anniversary, long before missed Fridays and unexplained appointments had entered their lives. Ethan had always told her that trust was not built through perfect circumstances but through honest choices made during imperfect ones. Tonight those words echoed inside her mind with unexpected weight. She carried the photograph back to its place and quietly opened the family calendar hanging inside the pantry door. One detail immediately caught her attention. Nearly every Friday afternoon for the past 4 months carried the same handwritten note in Ethan's careful script. Private appointment. No location. No explanation. Claire slowly traced her fingertips across those repeating words before closing the calendar again. She made only one decision that night. She would not accuse. She would not assume. Before allowing fear to destroy 12 years of love, she would quietly discover the truth for herself, even if the answer changed everything she believed about the man she had married. Sleep came only in short fragments that night. Every time Claire closed her eyes, she found herself back at the intersection watching Ethan smile toward the pregnant woman outside the Women's Health Center. By sunrise she had reached no conclusions, only one promise to herself. She would seek facts before allowing fear to become certainty. Friday arrived with crisp autumn air drifting through the open kitchen windows as Ethan prepared for another early departure. He poured coffee into a travel mug, buttoned the cuffs of his white shirt, and smiled warmly at Claire exactly as he always did. "I may be home a little later this afternoon," he said while reaching for his navy suit jacket. "There are a few things I need to take care of." Claire met his eyes, searching for something different, something that might confirm or erase the doubts quietly growing inside her. Instead she saw only the same calm kindness she had trusted for 12 years. "Drive safely," she replied. Ethan kissed her forehead once more before leaving the townhouse. Through the front window Claire watched his black sedan disappear around the corner. 10 minutes later she quietly picked up her own keys. She did not feel proud of what she was about to do, yet neither did she feel ashamed. She simply needed to understand what had become impossible to ignore. Keeping several cars behind Ethan through Manhattan traffic required little effort. He drove without hesitation, following familiar streets before turning toward the same neighborhood Claire had visited only days earlier. Her heartbeat quickened as the modern glass building came into view once again. The polished sign outside clearly identified it as the Midtown Women's Wellness Center. Claire parked across the street where she could observe without attracting attention. Ethan entered the building carrying nothing except a small white gift bag with pale blue tissue paper visible at the top. 20 minutes passed. Mothers, nurses, physicians, and families moved in and out of the entrance while Claire remained quietly inside her car. Then the revolving doors opened again. The same pregnant woman appeared beside Ethan. She smiled with unmistakable gratitude while accepting the small gift bag from him. Ethan laughed softly after saying something Claire could not hear. A nurse standing nearby smiled as well, as though witnessing an ordinary moment between people who knew one another well. The pregnant woman gently rested one hand against her stomach before waving goodbye. Ethan nodded warmly and walked back toward the parking garage alone. From Claire's position across the street, the entire scene looked painfully intimate despite the distance separating her from the truth. She noticed the hospital bracelet still wrapped around the woman's wrist. This time she also noticed something else. Before entering the building, Ethan stopped beside a small memorial garden near the entrance where a bronze plaque stood beneath a flowering dogwood tree. He remained there quietly for several moments, his head slightly lowered, before continuing toward his car. The gesture seemed deeply personal, yet completely impossible to understand. Claire waited until Ethan drove away before slowly crossing the street herself. She stood outside the Women's Health Center pretending to study the building directory while her eyes drifted toward the memorial garden. Fresh white lilies rested beneath the bronze plaque, though from where she stood the engraved names remained impossible to read. Before she could step closer, the automatic doors opened behind her and the pregnant woman walked outside once again. For a brief moment their eyes met. The young woman offered Claire a gentle smile filled with unexpected warmth, as though greeting a complete stranger with effortless kindness. Claire politely smiled back, unaware that the answer she had been searching for was standing only a few feet away, hidden behind a story neither of them yet knew the other desperately needed to hear. Claire remained standing near the entrance of the Midtown Women's Wellness Center long after the young woman disappeared back inside. The gentle smile they had exchanged should have brought comfort, yet it only deepened the mystery quietly growing inside her heart. She turned her attention once more toward the small memorial garden beside the building. Drawn by something she could not explain, she slowly walked across the stone pathway until she reached the bronze plaque beneath the flowering dogwood tree. Fresh white lilies rested carefully at its base, and a small American flag stood beside a framed photograph protected beneath glass. Claire leaned forward just enough to read the inscription. Before she could make out every word, a maintenance employee approached carrying gardening tools and politely smiled. "Beautiful spot, isn't it?" he said. Claire nodded. "It really is. Was someone important honored here?" The older man looked toward the plaque with quiet respect. "Very important to a lot of people. Every Friday someone still brings fresh flowers." Claire glanced instinctively toward the entrance where Ethan had stood only minutes earlier. "The same person?" she asked. The gardener smiled knowingly. "Almost every week." Before Claire could ask another question, the automatic doors opened again. A physician wearing a white medical coat stepped outside while speaking with two nurses. His silver hair and calm expression reflected decades of experience caring for families. The nurses excused themselves, leaving him briefly alone near the memorial garden. Claire noticed the embroidered name above his pocket. Dr. Samuel Bennett. She recognized it immediately from several charity events Ethan's foundation had sponsored over the years. The physician looked toward the flowers and quietly adjusted one stem that had leaned sideways in the morning breeze. His expression carried genuine affection rather than routine obligation. Claire hesitated before approaching. "Excuse me, Dr. Bennett." He turned with a warm smile. "Good afternoon. How may I help you?" Claire searched for the right words, unwilling to sound suspicious or intrusive. "I was admiring the memorial garden. It seems very meaningful." The physician nodded slowly. "It reminds us that kindness often continues long after someone is gone." His answer lingered unexpectedly in Claire's thoughts. She glanced toward the building entrance once more before asking carefully, "Does someone from the Carter Foundation support this place?" Dr. Bennett smiled with quiet appreciation. "Very generously." Claire's heartbeat quickened. "Mr. Ethan Carter?" The physician's expression brightened. "Yes. Ethan has never forgotten his promise." Claire froze. Promise. The single word echoed louder than anything she had imagined hearing that afternoon. Before she could ask what promise he meant, a nurse hurried outside carrying a patient chart. "Dr. Bennett, Emily is ready whenever you are." The physician acknowledged her with a nod before turning back toward Claire. "I am sorry, I have patients waiting." He paused politely. "If you are ever visiting someone here, I hope you find comfort. This building has witnessed remarkable acts of love and extraordinary courage." With that, he returned inside, leaving Claire standing alone beside the memorial garden. She slowly looked back toward the bronze plaque, her eyes finally focusing on the framed photograph beneath the flowers. 3 young men stood together wearing hiking gear, smiling into the camera beneath a bright summer sky. One of them was unmistakably Ethan, nearly 15 years younger. Standing beside him with an arm across his shoulder was another smiling young man whose face Claire had never seen before. Below the photograph, a single engraved sentence caught her attention. "In loving memory of Mason Brooks, whose courage continues through every life he touched." Claire whispered the unfamiliar name to herself. Mason Brooks. Then another realization quietly settled into place. The pregnant woman's last name, written briefly on the patient directory near the entrance only moments earlier, had also been Brooks. For the first time since the traffic light changed days earlier, the story inside Claire's mind began to shift, not toward certainty, but toward a truth she had never even considered. Claire drove home beneath a gray autumn sky with the name Mason Brooks echoing quietly inside her thoughts. The city looked exactly the same as it had every other Friday, yet every familiar street seemed to carry a different meaning. Until that afternoon she had believed she was following a trail leading toward betrayal. Now every answer uncovered another question instead. Why had Ethan never mentioned Mason? Why did Dr. Bennett speak of a promise with such quiet respect? And why did the pregnant woman share the same last name engraved beneath the memorial plaque? By the time Claire reached the townhouse, she realized something even more unsettling. She no longer knew which possibility frightened her more, discovering that Ethan had lied to her or discovering that she had misunderstood everything. She stepped inside and found the house as peaceful as always. Sunlight filtered across the hardwood floors while fresh flowers brightened the kitchen island. She made herself a cup of tea but barely touched it. Instead she carried her laptop into the living room and quietly searched public archives, old charity articles, and foundation announcements connected to Hayes Global Holdings. Hundreds of stories praised Ethan's business success, philanthropic work, and leadership, but almost none mentioned Mason Brooks. After nearly an hour of searching, Claire finally discovered a short newspaper article published more than 13 years earlier. The headline described a mountain rescue during a severe hiking accident in Colorado. 3 close friends had been caught in dangerous conditions while descending a remote trail. The article praised the quick response of local rescue teams but revealed few personal details. One sentence, however, caught Claire's full attention. A participant named Mason Brooks had been recognized for extraordinary courage during the emergency. The article ended without explaining what had happened afterward. Claire stared at the screen for several long moments before quietly closing the browser. The story felt incomplete, as though someone had intentionally protected the privacy of everyone involved. That evening Ethan returned home carrying the same calm smile she had seen every day throughout their marriage. He greeted her warmly, asked about her afternoon, and complimented the homemade soup simmering gently on the stove. Nothing about his behavior appeared forced or rehearsed. If he carried a secret, he carried it with remarkable peace rather than fear. During dinner Claire noticed another small detail she had overlooked before. Ethan's phone vibrated once beside his plate. He glanced at the message and smiled with unmistakable relief before placing the phone face down without replying immediately. "Everything all right?" Claire asked softly. Ethan nodded. Yes. Someone I care about received good news today. The answer was honest, yet incomplete. Claire studied his face carefully. There was no hesitation in his eyes, only genuine happiness mixed with quiet gratitude. She wanted to ask whether that someone was Emily Brooks, but the memory of Dr. Bennett's words stopped her. Ethan has never forgotten his promise. Instead of questioning him, Claire simply smiled and changed the conversation. Later that night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Claire quietly walked into his home office searching not for proof of betrayal but for understanding. She never opened private drawers or confidential files. Instead, her attention settled upon a framed photograph resting alone on a bookshelf. It was the same picture she had seen beneath the memorial plaque. 3 young men stood laughing beneath a brilliant summer sky. On the back of the frame, written in Ethan's careful handwriting, were only 6 simple words. Brothers are not always born together. Claire gently returned the photograph to its place. Standing alone in the quiet office, she felt the balance inside her heart begin to shift. Whatever story connected Ethan, Mason, and Emily, it had begun long before she ever saw a pregnant woman wave from a hospital entrance, and for the first time she believed the truth might be far more beautiful than the fear she had carried since that red light. The following Friday arrived with clear blue skies stretching above Manhattan, yet Claire carried a quiet uncertainty that no beautiful morning could erase. She had promised herself she would stop assuming and begin understanding, but every answer she uncovered seemed to lead toward an even deeper mystery. After Ethan left for his usual Friday appointment, Claire waited several minutes before driving toward the Midtown Women's Wellness Center once again. This time she had no intention of following him. Instead, she wanted to revisit the Memorial Garden and perhaps learn a little more about the man whose name continued appearing wherever Ethan's unexplained Fridays seemed to lead. The parking lot was quieter than before. Parents carried newborn babies toward waiting cars while nurses greeted families with familiar smiles. The building no longer felt suspicious to Claire. It felt peaceful. She slowly walked through the Memorial Garden until she stood once again before the bronze plaque honoring Mason Brooks. Fresh white lilies rested beneath the engraved photograph exactly as they had the week before, but today another small object caught her attention. Someone had carefully placed a tiny pair of knitted blue baby socks beside the flowers. The simple gift carried quiet tenderness rather than sadness. As Claire looked at the photograph, she heard gentle footsteps approaching from behind. He would have smiled if he had seen those, an older voice said warmly. Claire turned and found Dr. Samuel Bennett carrying a paper cup of coffee and several patient files beneath one arm. His expression brightened with recognition. "We meet again." Claire returned the smile politely. "I was thinking about what you said last week. About promises." Dr. Bennett looked toward the memorial with thoughtful affection before answering. "Some promises become part of who we are." Claire hesitated for only a moment before speaking honestly. "I know Ethan Carter visits here often." The physician nodded without surprise. "Almost every Friday." Claire lowered her eyes. "I have been trying to understand why." Dr. Bennett remained silent for several seconds, clearly weighing the importance of privacy against the sincerity in Claire's voice. Finally he spoke carefully. "I cannot discuss my patients, Mrs. Carter." Claire immediately nodded. "I understand." She turned slightly as though preparing to leave. Before she could take another step, Dr. Bennett gently added, "But I can tell you something that belongs to history rather than medicine." Claire stopped. The physician looked once more toward Mason's photograph. "There are people who spend their lives talking about loyalty," he said quietly. "And there are people who quietly live it every single week without asking for recognition. Your husband belongs to the second group." Claire felt her heartbeat slow instead of racing. Dr. Bennett continued. "Many years ago, 3 young friends walked into these halls after a terrible tragedy changed all of their lives forever. One of them made a promise that day. I have watched him keep it ever since." Claire looked toward Ethan's familiar face smiling from the old photograph. "Does Emily know him because of that promise?" she asked softly. Dr. Bennett offered only the gentlest smile. "Emily knows exactly why Ethan visits." He paused before adding one final sentence. "The remarkable part is not that he kept his promise. The remarkable part is that he never wanted anyone else to know he was keeping it." With those words, the physician excused himself and disappeared through the hospital doors. Claire remained standing beneath the flowering dogwood tree, staring quietly at Mason's photograph while a gentle breeze moved through the garden. For the first time since the afternoon at the traffic light, the fear inside her heart began giving way to something entirely different. She still did not know the complete truth, but she no longer believed she was searching for betrayal. She was searching for the story of a promise strong enough to survive many years, hidden quietly behind a kindness that had never asked to be seen. Claire left the memorial garden carrying far fewer answers than she had hoped to find, yet far more peace than she had expected to feel. The city sounded different as she walked back toward her car. The familiar rhythm of buses, distant sirens, and hurried footsteps blended into the ordinary music of Manhattan, but the fear that had followed her for weeks no longer controlled every thought. Dr. Bennett's words continued echoing quietly inside her mind. "Your husband belongs to the second group." She repeated the sentence several times during the drive home, wondering what kind of promise could remain so important that Ethan would protect it even from the person he loved most. That evening Ethan arrived home carrying a small paper bakery box tied with a blue ribbon. "I stopped by your favorite bakery," he said with an easy smile. "They still had the lemon pastries you like." Claire accepted the box, smiling warmly while noticing something she had overlooked for months. Ethan was not acting like a man hiding two separate lives. He was acting like someone carrying a responsibility he had never learned how to explain. During dinner their conversation flowed more naturally than it had in weeks. They laughed about an employee's golden retriever interrupting an executive video conference and discussed plans for the upcoming charity gala. Yet beneath every ordinary moment, Claire sensed another conversation waiting patiently for the right time. Later that night, while Ethan finished reviewing financial reports in his office, Claire stepped onto the townhouse balcony overlooking the quiet street below. Autumn leaves drifted beneath the soft glow of streetlights as she considered everything she had discovered. The hospital. Emily Brooks. Mason Brooks. The memorial garden. The repeated Friday visits. None of it fit the story she had first imagined while waiting at the traffic light. The following morning Claire attended a volunteer planning session at a children's literacy foundation. As the meeting concluded, one of the coordinators mentioned that several newborn care packages had recently been donated anonymously through the Carter Family Foundation. Claire quietly asked who had organized the contribution. "The paperwork lists Mr. Carter," the coordinator answered, "but he specifically requested that nothing be announced publicly." Claire thanked her politely, saying nothing more. Another small piece quietly settled into place. Ethan had never sought recognition. On her way home she stopped at a neighborhood bookstore to clear her thoughts. While browsing the history section, she noticed a local community magazine displayed near the register. The cover featured a story celebrating families supported by neighborhood charities. As she turned a few pages, a familiar photograph caught her attention. Dr. Samuel Bennett stood beside volunteers at the Midtown Women's Wellness Center during last year's remembrance ceremony. Near the edge of the photograph stood Ethan, slightly behind everyone else, helping arrange flowers beneath the memorial plaque. He was not standing in front of cameras or giving a speech. He was simply carrying boxes of supplies while smiling quietly at a young woman whose face Claire immediately recognized. Emily Brooks. The accompanying article mentioned only one sentence about her. Expectant mother supported by longtime family friends after the loss of her husband. Claire slowly closed the magazine. The words family friends rested heavily in her heart. Every clue now pointed away from betrayal and toward compassion, yet one important question remained unanswered. Why had Ethan never trusted her enough to tell her the truth? That evening, as she placed the magazine gently inside her tote bag before returning home, Claire made a decision that felt different from every choice she had made since the afternoon at the red light. She would stop searching through fragments of other people's stories. The next answer had to come from the only person who had carried the promise from the beginning. Ethan himself. Sunday morning arrived wrapped in gentle sunshine, and for the first time in weeks Claire woke with something stronger than suspicion. She woke with patience. She prepared breakfast while Ethan watered the small herb garden outside the kitchen window, humming quietly to himself exactly as he had done since they first moved into the townhouse. Watching him through the glass, Claire realized how ordinary he still looked. Nothing about him reflected the secret she had spent weeks trying to understand. After breakfast, Ethan received another message on his phone. He glanced at the screen, smiled with unmistakable relief, and stood. "I need to step out for a little while," he said warmly. "I should be back before dinner." Claire simply nodded. "Drive safely." This time she did not follow him. Instead, she chose a long walk through Central Park, hoping the quiet paths and autumn colors would settle the questions still resting inside her heart. As she returned home that afternoon, her phone rang. The unfamiliar number almost went unanswered until she noticed the Midtown Women's Wellness Center displayed across the screen. "Mrs. Carter?" a gentle voice asked. "This is Dr. Samuel Bennett. I hope I am not disturbing you." Claire immediately recognized him. "Not at all." The physician paused briefly before continuing. "Emily asked me to pass along a message. She remembered meeting you outside the center several days ago. She realized afterward who you were." Claire felt her heart skip. "She knows who I am?" "She does," Dr. Bennett answered kindly. She was worried that seeing Ethan with her might have caused unnecessary confusion. Claire remained silent, allowing him to continue. "Emily asked whether you might be willing to meet her tomorrow afternoon. She believes you deserve to hear something directly from her rather than through assumptions or second-hand conversations." Claire looked out the living room window as golden leaves drifted across the quiet sidewalk. "Did Ethan ask her to contact me?" "No," Dr. Bennett replied gently. "He does not know I am calling. Emily made this decision herself." After ending the call, Claire sat quietly for several minutes, reflecting upon everything that had happened since the afternoon at the red light. Tomorrow she would finally meet the woman whose brief wave had changed the course of so many thoughts. The following afternoon Claire arrived at the wellness center carrying no anger, only quiet curiosity. Dr. Bennett greeted her warmly before leading her toward a peaceful family lounge overlooking the Memorial Garden. A few moments later Emily Brooks entered the room wearing a comfortable cream sweater over her maternity dress. She smiled warmly, though her eyes carried understandable nervousness. "Mrs. Carter," she said softly. Claire immediately shook her head with a gentle smile. "Please call me Claire." Emily relaxed slightly before taking a seat across from her. For several moments neither woman spoke. Finally Emily looked down at the hospital bracelet still resting around her wrist. "I have wanted to meet you properly for a long time," she admitted. Claire listened quietly. Emily folded her hands over her growing baby bump before speaking again. "The first thing I need you to know is the most important." She lifted her eyes with complete sincerity. "Ethan has never been anything except a true friend to me." Claire felt the tension inside her chest slowly begin to disappear. Emily continued gently. "I am not carrying Ethan's child." She smiled softly through gathering emotion. "I am carrying Mason's son. My husband would have been the happiest man in the world if he could have met him." The room became completely still. At that moment every frightening assumption born at a Manhattan traffic light quietly disappeared, replaced by a truth that felt both heartbreaking and deeply beautiful. Claire finally understood one undeniable fact. Emily had never been standing between her marriage. She had been carrying forward the last remaining piece of a family that Ethan had promised he would never abandon. Emily sat quietly for a moment, gently resting one hand over her baby bump while sunlight streamed through the family lounge overlooking the Memorial Garden. Claire remained silent, allowing her to continue without interruption. "Mason and Ethan met during their first semester of college," Emily began softly. "They became the kind of friends who never needed to explain themselves. They celebrated every success together, survived every difficult season together, and promised they would always look after each other's families no matter what life brought. She smiled faintly toward the framed photograph resting on a nearby shelf. When Mason and I married, Ethan stood beside him as his best man. By the time our wedding ended, I felt like I had gained another brother instead of just another friend. Claire listened carefully as every piece of the story settled gently into place. Emily continued with quiet honesty. Several years later they planned one last hiking trip before Ethan became completely consumed by expanding Hayes Global Holdings. It was supposed to be a simple weekend together. Her smile slowly faded. A sudden rockslide changed everything. She lowered her eyes for only a moment before finding the strength to continue. Mason protected Ethan during the accident and gave rescue teams enough time to reach them. Ethan survived because Mason refused to leave him behind. The room became completely silent except for the distant laughter of newborn families walking through the hallway. Emily looked toward Claire with gentle sincerity. Before Mason passed away, he asked Ethan to promise two things. First, never let me feel alone. Second, if we were ever blessed with children, make sure they always knew their father was a man of extraordinary courage. Claire felt tears gather quietly, not from sadness alone but from the overwhelming beauty of a promise carried with such devotion. Ethan kept every single promise, Emily whispered. He helped me with insurance paperwork, met with attorneys after Mason's passing, visited every Friday to make certain I had everything I needed, and insisted that every decision remain private because he never wanted anyone to think he was helping for recognition. Claire slowly asked the question that had remained inside her heart from the beginning. Why did he never tell me? Emily smiled gently. Because I asked him not to. Claire looked surprised. Emily continued. When I learned I was expecting Mason's baby, I was frightened. I wanted time to process everything before the world knew. Ethan promised he would protect my privacy until I felt ready. He believed keeping that promise was one way of honoring Mason. Dr. Samuel Bennett quietly entered the lounge carrying 2 cups of tea before placing them gently on the table. Your husband visited every Friday, he said warmly. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes baby clothes. Sometimes he simply listened while Emily spoke about becoming a mother without the man she loved beside her. Most weeks he spent more time encouraging hope than discussing practical matters. Claire looked toward the memorial garden through the large windows where the flowering dogwood swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. Suddenly she remembered every unexplained Friday, every tired smile Ethan carried home, every anonymous charitable donation, every fresh bouquet of white lilies beneath Mason's plaque, and every message that had quietly lifted the weight from his shoulders. None of those moments had ever belonged to betrayal. They had belonged to loyalty. Emily reached across the table and lightly touched Claire's hand. Please do not blame him for protecting my confidence, she said softly. If anything, I have worried for months that I asked too much of him. Claire gently squeezed her hand in return. No, she answered with quiet conviction. You reminded him how to keep a promise. I only wish I had trusted him enough to ask before allowing my imagination to answer for him. Claire returned home just before sunset carrying a heart that felt unexpectedly lighter and heavier at the same time. The fear that had haunted her since the afternoon at the traffic light had disappeared, replaced by something far more difficult to carry. Regret. She walked slowly through the quiet townhouse, her fingertips brushing the polished wooden banister as she remembered every moment she had silently questioned Ethan's loyalty instead of asking him for the truth. Yet another thought continued returning just as often. Ethan had also carried this burden alone for months. By choosing silence to protect Emily's privacy, he had unknowingly allowed distance to grow inside his own marriage. Neither of them had acted out of selfishness. Both had acted out of love. They had simply loved different promises at the same time. A few minutes after 7 o'clock, the front door quietly opened. Ethan stepped inside carrying his familiar leather briefcase, looking pleasantly exhausted after another long day. He smiled as soon as he saw Claire waiting in the living room. You are home early, he said warmly. Claire returned his smile. So are you. Ethan loosened his tie before noticing the unusual calm in her expression. Is everything all right? For several seconds Claire simply looked at the man she had loved for 12 years. She saw the same gentle eyes that had comforted her through family losses, celebrated promotions, and quietly supported every dream she had ever pursued. She realized they had never changed. Only her understanding had. Can we sit together for a little while? She asked softly. Ethan immediately nodded. They settled onto the sofa beside the large living room window where evening lights slowly illuminated the Manhattan skyline. Neither of them reached for a phone. Neither turned on the television. The silence between them felt honest rather than uncomfortable. Claire finally took a slow breath. I know about Emily. Ethan's shoulders became still. He did not interrupt. I met her yesterday, Claire continued gently. And I spoke with Dr. Bennett. Ethan closed his eyes briefly before opening them again. There was no anger in his face. Only quiet disappointment that the secret had reached her this way instead of through him. Claire, he began softly, I never wanted you to learn about Mason from someone else. She reached for his hand before he could continue. I know. Ethan looked at her with visible surprise. Claire squeezed his hand gently. Emily told me everything. She told me about Mason. About the promise. About the Friday visits. About why you kept protecting her privacy. Ethan lowered his eyes. I should have trusted you with the truth sooner. His voice carried genuine regret. Every week I planned to explain everything. Every week I convinced myself I needed to wait a little longer because Emily deserved the chance to tell her own story first. Somewhere along the way I forgot that protecting one promise should never require risking another. Claire nodded slowly. And I should have trusted our marriage enough to ask you before believing what I thought I saw. Ethan looked directly into her eyes. Did you think I had stopped loving you? Claire smiled sadly. For one terrible afternoon, I thought perhaps I had lost the man I married. Then I realized I had almost lost something even more important. My trust in the man I already knew. Ethan gently wrapped both hands around hers. I have never stopped choosing you, Claire. Not for a single day. Tears quietly gathered in her eyes as she answered with complete honesty. I believe you. For the first time in many months, the silence that followed carried no unanswered questions. It carried understanding. Outside, the lights of Manhattan shimmered across the evening skyline while inside the townhouse two people quietly rediscovered that the strongest relationships are not built because secrets never exist, but because truth eventually finds the courage to come home. The following Friday morning arrived with an unexpected sense of peace inside the Carter townhouse. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor as Claire placed 2 cups of coffee on the breakfast table, smiling when Ethan walked in wearing the same navy suit he always wore on Fridays. This time there was no quiet tension hiding behind ordinary conversation. There were no unanswered questions waiting beneath polite smiles. There was only honesty. Ethan looked at Claire gently before speaking. Emily has another appointment this afternoon. Dr. Bennett said everything looks wonderful. Claire smiled warmly. Would it be all right if I came with you? Ethan looked genuinely surprised. You would like that? Claire reached across the table and lightly squeezed his hand. I think promises become stronger when they are carried together. Ethan smiled with unmistakable gratitude. I know Emily would appreciate that. Later that afternoon they arrived together at the Midtown Women's Wellness Center. Nurses greeted Ethan with familiar warmth before immediately welcoming Claire as though she had always belonged there as well. Emily sat in the family lounge reviewing a parenting booklet when she looked up and saw them walking in together. Relief immediately appeared across her face. I was hoping you would come, she said softly. Claire embraced her carefully before taking a seat beside her. Dr. Samuel Bennett soon joined them carrying the latest examination results. Mother and baby are both doing beautifully, he announced with a broad smile. Emily quietly closed her eyes in grateful relief while Ethan lowered his head for a brief moment, silently thanking the friend whose promise had guided him through every Friday visit. After the appointment, the four of them stepped into the memorial garden beneath the flowering dogwood tree. Fresh white lilies rested beneath Mason Brooks' bronze plaque, just as they had every week for years. Ethan knelt to straighten one flower that had leaned gently in the afternoon breeze. Claire watched him for a moment before speaking. "I finally understand why you never missed a Friday." Ethan stood beside her. "I never wanted Mason to become only a memory." Claire looked toward the smiling photograph beneath the plaque. "He never will." Emily quietly touched the small hospital bracelet still resting around her wrist. "Sometimes I worried my son would grow up hearing only stories." Ethan smiled gently. "He will hear stories, but he will also know people who loved his father." Claire nodded in agreement. "He will know exactly what kind of man Mason was." Dr. Bennett looked at the three of them standing together before the memorial and smiled with quiet satisfaction. "Healing often begins the moment people stop carrying difficult burdens alone." The words settled softly over the garden. Claire reached into her handbag and removed a small picture frame she had prepared earlier that morning. Inside was a restored copy of the old hiking photograph showing Ethan, Mason, and their third college friend smiling beneath a bright summer sky. She handed it to Emily. "I thought your son should always have this." Emily's eyes filled with grateful tears as she accepted the gift. "Thank you." Ethan looked at Claire with quiet admiration. "You somehow found a way to make this promise even bigger than it was before." Claire smiled gently. "Because promises rooted in love are meant to grow." As they walked together toward the parking lot beneath the golden autumn sunlight, Claire noticed the pale hospital bracelet still resting on Emily's wrist. Weeks earlier it had become the symbol of her deepest fear. Now it reminded her that the truth often waits patiently behind the parts of another person's life we cannot yet see. Trust had not returned because every secret disappeared. It returned because compassion, honesty, and understanding finally stood in the same place where painful assumptions had once been. 3 weeks later, the first heavy snowfall of the season quietly covered Manhattan as Claire received a phone call just after sunrise. She recognized Dr. Samuel Bennett's number immediately. Before he could finish his first sentence, she was already smiling. "Emily is in labor," he said warmly. "Everything is progressing beautifully." Claire thanked him before gently waking Ethan. The moment he heard the news, he smiled with the same quiet gratitude she had come to recognize whenever Mason's promise found another chance to live through kindness. Within 30 minutes they were driving together through the peaceful winter streets toward the Midtown Women's Wellness Center. This time the familiar building no longer represented unanswered questions or painful assumptions. It had become a place where healing quietly unfolded one life at a time. Emily greeted them with remarkable calm despite the long hours ahead. "I am so glad both of you came," she said, reaching for Claire's hand. Ethan stood nearby with quiet encouragement, offering whatever support was needed while always respecting Emily's wishes and the guidance of the medical team. Throughout the day Claire remained beside Emily, reading encouraging messages from friends, helping her stay comfortable, and reminding her that she was not facing the journey alone. Several hours later, the quiet hallway suddenly filled with the unmistakable sound of a newborn baby's first cry. Every anxious thought that had filled the waiting room disappeared in an instant. Dr. Bennett stepped through the delivery room doors wearing the warm smile Claire had come to admire. "Mother and baby are both healthy," he announced happily. Relief spread across every face. A nurse carefully carried the newborn into the softly lit family room, wrapped securely in a pale blue blanket. Emily smiled through grateful tears before looking toward Claire. "Would you hold him first?" Claire immediately shook her head. "You should." Emily gently smiled. "Please." Mason always believed family was created by love, not only by blood. "You helped give me courage when I needed it most." Claire carefully accepted the tiny baby into her arms, overwhelmed by the peaceful weight of new life. The little boy quietly opened his eyes for only a moment before settling comfortably against the blanket. Claire smiled through happy tears while Ethan stood beside her, his expression filled with gratitude, remembrance, and hope. He gently touched the baby's tiny hand before whispering, "Hello, little one. Your father would be so proud of you." Emily looked at them both with quiet peace. "His name is Mason Brooks Jr." The room fell silent as everyone honored the beautiful meaning behind those words. Dr. Bennett quietly removed the pale hospital identification bracelet from Emily's wrist after completing the final paperwork. She looked at it thoughtfully before handing it to Claire. "I think you should keep this," Emily said softly. Claire looked surprised. "Why me?" Emily smiled warmly. "Because the first time we saw each other, that bracelet represented fear. Today it represents truth, friendship, and the family we found together." Claire carefully accepted the bracelet and slipped it into her coat pocket beside the restored hiking photograph she now carried everywhere. As snow continued falling gently outside the hospital windows, she realized that the smallest objects often carried the greatest lessons. A simple hospital bracelet had once become the beginning of painful assumptions. Now it had become a quiet reminder that patience reveals what fear can never see, and that the greatest acts of love are often the ones performed without asking for recognition, trusting that someday the truth will arrive exactly when every heart is finally ready to receive it. 1 year later, the first warm days of spring returned to Manhattan, carrying with them the quiet promise of new beginnings. Outside the newly dedicated Mason Brooks Family Resource Center, neighbors, physicians, volunteers, and young families gathered beneath clear blue skies to celebrate the opening of a place created to support widowed parents and children facing uncertain futures. The project had grown from one promise into a community of compassion, funded jointly by the Carter Family Foundation and generous partners who believed that kindness should continue long after headlines fade. Claire stood beside Ethan as guests slowly filled the courtyard, smiling when little Mason Brooks Jr. laughed from Emily's arms while reaching toward colorful ribbons fluttering in the gentle breeze. The little boy had inherited his father's bright smile, his mother's gentle eyes, and a joyful curiosity that seemed to brighten everyone around him. Dr. Samuel Bennett welcomed the crowd with a few heartfelt words before inviting Ethan to speak. Ethan stepped to the podium, looked toward the memorial garden visible beyond the courtyard, and paused for a quiet moment. "Many people measure success by what they build for themselves," he began calmly. "My closest friend taught me that the greatest success comes from what we build for others." Mason believed that love continues through ordinary acts of kindness, and I have spent the past several years trying to honor that lesson. Today this center belongs to every family who needs hope, encouragement, and the reminder that they are never alone. As warm applause filled the courtyard, Ethan stepped away from the microphone and invited Emily to stand beside him. She smiled through grateful tears before gently placing little Mason into Claire's arms for just a moment while she addressed the audience. "My husband is remembered today because people chose faithfulness instead of forgetting," she said softly. "My son will grow up knowing that true family is created by loyalty, compassion, and the courage to keep promises even when no one is watching." Claire looked down at the happy child resting comfortably against her shoulder and remembered another afternoon long ago when she had first seen a hospital bracelet and allowed fear to write a story that had never been true. She quietly reached into her handbag where that same bracelet remained inside a small velvet pouch. She no longer carried it as a reminder of doubt. She carried it as a reminder that patience allows truth to reveal itself in its proper time. After the ceremony, the guests gathered beneath the flowering dogwood tree where fresh white lilies once again rested beside Mason Brooks' memorial plaque. This time, however, the atmosphere carried more gratitude than sorrow. Children played nearby while families shared stories, volunteers welcomed new visitors, and laughter gently replaced silence. Ethan slipped his hand into Claire's as they watched little Mason toddle carefully across the grass toward the memorial with Emily smiling only a few steps behind him. Claire looked at her husband and quietly said, "Thank you for teaching me that trust is not believing we will always understand everything immediately. Trust is believing the person we love deserves the chance to tell their story." Ethan smiled warmly. "And thank you for reminding me that protecting one promise should never mean carrying every burden alone. Together they watched the little boy place a single white flower beneath his father's memorial before looking up with a joyful smile that reflected both remembrance and hope. As sunlight settled across the garden, Claire realized the journey that had begun with uncertainty at a city intersection had never truly been about suspicion. It had always been about discovering that genuine love is measured not by perfect circumstances but by integrity, compassion, forgiveness, and the quiet courage to choose one another again after the truth has finally been revealed. The city continued moving beyond the garden just as it always had, yet for everyone standing beneath the flowering tree, one promise had become a legacy, one friendship had become a family, and one moment of misunderstanding had become a lifelong reminder that the strongest hearts are the ones willing to trust, to listen, and to love beyond what first appears to be true.